offensive coordinator hires of the offseason. We'll discuss coming up next here on Locked On Sooners.
You are Locked On Sooners, your daily podcast on the Oklahoma Sooners. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thanks again for making Locked On Sooners your first listen every single day. Shout out to all the everydayers out there. Tune in and subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts. We're free and available on all podcast platforms and on YouTube. Hit that subscribe button and that notification bell to let you know when new episodes drop. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So Ben Arbuckle was a big-time hire by the Oklahoma Sooners. He is a highly regarded offensive coordinator from his time at Washington State, but even dating back to his time at Western Kentucky. And Corey Nagel of 247 Sports ranked the top 10 best coordinator hires, not just offense, but both defense and offense coordinator hires of the offseason. And Ben Arbuckle came in at number 9. Here's what he had to say. Now, Oklahoma is banking on Venables making the right hire in 29-year-old Ben Arbuckle from Washington State, getting transfer quarterback John Mateer in what essentially was a package deal is key to reigniting the Sooners offense for 2025. I liked where Arbuckle landed. You know, he's not going to be Jim Knowles. He's not going to be who was the guy that went from Notre Dame to he went to Cincinnati, but from Penn State to Clemson, there are a lot of really strong coordinator
Tom
moves.
Allen, yeah,
a lot of really strong coordinator moves around the country. Arbuckle making the jump from the Pac-2 to the SEC, still getting a lot of respect.
Yeah, and I feel like being a top 10 hire is a fair number for him to be, and number 9 is a fair area for him to be as well. I mean, he's not, like you said, Jim Knowles, which was probably the biggest hire in the offseason. Heck, even Gus Malzahn going to Florida State from being the head coach at UCF was a pretty massive pickup. But I actually like that spot as well, and I agree. The big deal of getting John Mateer to follow in a package deal was probably the one thing that put the icing on the cake for him to be able to be considered a top 10 hire, because that's what you needed. You needed to bring in not only a coach, but you need to bring in a quarterback that knows the system, at least for year one, for you to be able to actually see success quickly. Now, granted, I can see Ben Arbuckle making like Michael Hawkins into something special. Heck, he could be another Cam Ward underneath him, because we saw when Cam got underneath, Arbuckle and staff, he really started to show out. But you now don't have to wait and see what everybody else is going to look like with them. You've got the dude that's already put up numbers with them. And so, John, I think that's probably that to me is the reason why you would have him as a top 10 hire in that situation.
Well, I think with or without Mateer, I think he was one of the better coordinator hires of the offseason, because you've seen him put up big numbers both at Western Kentucky and then at Washington State. He's following that trajectory upward. Now it's just he has to go do it at Oklahoma to prove that it wasn't a flash in the pan at either of those two smaller schools. He's going to have to do it against SEC competition. We've seen this system work at a lot of places. I mean, you're seeing it at Texas Tech with Zach Kittley, right? He was a name that was on a lot of people's buzz lists and hot boards whenever the offensive coordinator position came open. They wanted to try and snatch him away from Texas Tech before he went and got a head coaching job. Yeah. It's a system that is going to create favorable matchups for your playmakers on offense, and that's why it's so successful. You bring in a guy like John Mateer who's got that experience in the system, and that just is the icing on the cake. Because now you're not having to develop somebody like you just mentioned. You've got a known quantity at quarterback, and it's a quality player. It's not just a okay player. You're hoping that he makes a jump. No, it's a really, really good player who's shown some really good things, and you're hoping he makes a jump. Now, was he perfect last year? Not at all, but you don't get to 44 total touchdowns by accident. You don't have almost 4,000 combined yards by accident. I know some of those games were inefficient passing games, but he still put up big numbers. And yes, maybe against some lower level competition, but that's okay. We're expecting that with better talent around him, better coaching around him, that you see that jump happen. You see him make a big step forward to where he can help Oklahoma. Does Oklahoma have to go score 40 points a game for them to be a successful team next year? No, I don't think so. If they can score 30 to 35 points a game, they're winning 9-10 games, and they're going to be in the playoff.
I don't even think they got to even score, 30 points, to be honest. I think about 25 to 28 is a safe number because the defense showed last year they did enough to hold teams under, 30 on a regular basis. And that's how you can win games. As long as you're not turning the ball over, that is.
Right.
I mean, if you're giving the ball up every other play, then sure, you're going to, you spot a team 21 points in the first 5 minutes of the game. Yeah, you're probably going to give up 30 in that game. But if Oklahoma can go out there and keep that defense about the same, which I think the defense is going to step up to another level this coming season. I think that the secondary is a little bit better in comparison with more experience. I think the linebacker room is going to be better. I think the defensive line is going to be much better than it was last season, and that's no shade to the guys that just left. I just think that the young players we have and the experience that they've grown with and some of the players we've added, I think the defense is going to step up. But if you at least add, like I said, up to about 25 points and just help the defense by keeping them off the field just a little bit, I agree with you. I see about 9 wins, maybe 10, because you could have probably snuck out 2 to 3 more wins last season if the offense was competent. That's what Ben Arbuckle is going to give you now. He's going to give you some competence. He's going to have to prove it, which we all are in the boat of. I need you to show me that you're going to be able to do this. Give me a playbook. Show me some creativity. I mean, I don't even mind you giving me a jet sweep as long as it's not going to a tight end. Give me some good plays that makes sense for the scenario. It may work sometimes it won't. That's just kind of the game itself. But John, as long as Mateer and Arbuckle shows us that they can get the wide receivers in line and get the offensive line comfortable, I think I'm good. And I think that he shows it to be a great hire.
Well, and having a guy with Mateer's experience gives you someone who's going to get rid of the ball. He's not going to hold it back there. And when he takes off to run, he's going to be really, really dynamic and effective. But I think him being able to play with guys like Dion Burks, who is a really good wide receiver, a healthy Jaden Gibson, who's a really good wide receiver, I think that's going to help improve his efficiency as well. Because Dion Burks is a guy that can get open. We saw it in the first few weeks of the season last year. I mean, he was a catch machine. I mean, he wasn't putting up a ton of yardage, but he was catching a lot of balls for Oklahoma. It took until like week 11 or 12 before somebody else finally passed Dion Burks as the receptions leader on this team, because that's how many receptions he'd had in the first few weeks of the season before he got injured against Tennessee. So I'm looking forward to seeing how they're going to be able to get Dion Burks open in space. You throw in another guy like a Jacob Jordan or Isaiah Satania as that other slot guy when they're in 4 wide receiver sets. And I think the efficiency goes up for John Mateer, and you're going to get more explosives because you've got guys that are really, really good after the catch, in particular Burks and Satania. They can make people miss in the open field. So I think some of the things that, maybe John Mateer wasn't super efficient last year, you're going to see that efficiency increase with another year in Arbuckle's system and with improved talent around him, especially at wide receiver. So excited about that. I think, again, this Arbuckle hire, it's part of what's going to make or break the 2025 season for Oklahoma, and is going to be what makes or breaks Brent Venables' career at Oklahoma. But I think, and I feel pretty confident in saying that they got the right guy, so much so that I think that they're going to be a lot more competitive this next year. Whether they get to 9 wins or not, that's going to be the question, because it is a tough schedule. No doubt it's a tough schedule. But I think they're going to look a whole lot better. They're going to look like a team that's actually competent out there. They're not going to look like a team that has no idea what to do on offense.
That's the thing I'm curious to see, is just how competent can this offense look. Like, granted, watching Washington State, even when they played in the Apple Cup against Washington, playing, against some other competition, they look like a solid team. Can we get that same thing here at Oklahoma in the SEC? I think so. And, we've talked about this before. The competition is not going to be as grueling as everybody thinks, right? I mean, Mateer, they beat Texas Tech, they beat Washington. They ended up losing to, was it Boise State, but they didn't play just G5s the entire year. Most of the season, sure, but that Texas Tech and Washington win in back-to-back games, pretty big deal, in my personal opinion, for what you're trying to do. And Tech wasn't just god awful last year. They finished the year 8-5.
The one loss that stands out above all of them is that Wyoming loss at the end of the season, where they scored 13 points or something like that.
14, but yes.
But that was also, I think, around a time where maybe Arbuckle's name was starting to creep up in offensive coordinator hot boards and searches and things like that. And again, I don't know how soon the connection was made to Oklahoma, but it's hard to not consider that when something like that happens, when you don't have your best performance. It's kind of understandable sometimes if you have coaches that are thinking about other things, or players are worried that coaches are thinking about other things.
Yep.
And that's kind of what happens. Speaking of coaching, Oklahoma is going to have a big decision to make after another big time blowout loss to Florida. We'll discuss coming up next here on Locked On Sooners.